Are you ready?
Uh-oh, she's got the timer on.
Oh, no, it's live. 3 people are watching.
It's live, Linda. Let's do it.
Okay, we're live. We're feeding
You
it.
and me in 20 years, just so
Going out.
we're clear.
Welcome. This is the Florida Native Plant Society, Conradina chapter. We are in Southern Brevard, as you can tell. And we are here to introduce you to Doug Tallamy and his book, and it's Restoring Nature's Relationships. Our treasurer, Jane Higgins, is going to present this tonight to you, and then we're going to have a question and answer period afterwards, okay? And then we're going to do commercials. We have to do commercials. So I'm the one that's going to do commercials. So if you could please stay in those seats after questions and answers, I appreciate it. Thank you. So this is Jane Higgins. She's our treasurer and also the co-chair for the landscaping tour this year.
Yes. Yes. And the microphone works tonight. This is a thrill. I was shouting the other night. So as we were just talking to this young gentleman over here, if you think your house should be on the tour with the majority native plants, let Linda or I know, because we're always looking for homes to have on the tour. Always. Okay, so I've been a resident here in Brevard County for 40 years. 8 years as the treasurer on the Conradina board, so pretty much feel like I'm a native at this point. How many of you all have heard of Dr. Tallamy before? Okay, well that's pretty good. I'd say about a third. Well, by the end of this, you're going to be a super fan, like mine. Okay. So Dr. Tallamy is a professor up in the University of Delaware. He's a professor of entomology, and he's just an awesome guy. He's the one who put the science together on this presentation. So we're going to get started here. The first thing we're going to do is kind of a mini commercial for Satellite Beach. How many of y'all are residents of Satellite Beach? A couple of you? Okay, well I just want to say Satellite Beach has a knock it out of the park sustainability action plan. So you are very blessed here in the city of Satellite Beach to be a part of that. If you don't live in the city of Satellite Beach, I'd still encourage you to go on to their website and look at their sustainability plan, because wherever you live could probably benefit from using their plan. I live in Palm Bay. I joined the sustainability board and I sent them the Satellite Beach plan because it's that good. You know, like, let's use it as a model. We don't have to start from scratch. There's already some awesome work done out there. So as part of doing this presentation, we said that we would help Satellite Beach with some of their objectives in their sustainability plan. They were gracious enough to donate this space to us for all 4 sessions, and they've donated lots of other space for the tour. So that is just so awesome. We're thrilled. They're, again, knocked it out of the park. So here's some of the objectives that we've helped them with, and you're helping them with by being here today. They're trying to get their National Wildlife Certification, and in order to do that, they have to show that so many people have that certification and that they do community sessions such as this, educating the public. And on the tour, you're going to notice, and in the tour book, that we actually are tracking how many of the homeowners and sites have that certification. So that's helping as well, just to promote what we're all about here. And then another one, of course, here is the natural resources and outreach about invasive plants. We're going to talk about that a little bit today and how much invasive plants are screwing us up here. So any education about that is a big plus. And then also the harmful impacts and what we can do about that for the Indian River Lagoon, and doing more in our lawn to help the Indian River Lagoon. And finally, we're also working on this objective by being in this presentation today on resilient infrastructure, examples of stormwater usage that we're helping with here are by planting native plants and rain gardens, etc. That's really helping with the water issues in the Indian River Lagoon. Now, if you go on to the Satellite Beach Sustainability Plan, all these categories in the top right, they've got objectives and all of those, and they are awesome at having very specific deliverables about how those objectives are gonna get done. So it's not just this pie in the sky thing you see sometimes with plans like this. I cannot tell you how impressed I've been with their plan, so I highly encourage you to look at it. Okay, so that's enough of the commercial. We're gonna get into Dr. Tallamy's awesome photography now and his message. So, does anybody recognize this bird?
No.
No? This is the quetzal, and it's a beautiful bird, endangered bird from Central America. The reason it's endangered is because it has a very highly specialized diet, fruits of the wild avocado tree, and most of those trees have been cut down with development. So if we want to save that quetzal, we must put back the wild avocado trees. To save the jaguar, we have to plant a particular species of palms that makes a particular type of palm nut because it's the favorite food of peccaries, which is what the jaguar is required to eat. So it's that tightly interwoven. So specialization is really the rule rather than the exception. And that's what you're gonna see him repeatedly with examples making this point all the way back home to us here in Florida. So here's another example. He goes through to say that people think of specialization often only occurs in the tropics, but it isn't just the tropics, it's everywhere. It's the entire world. So here's another example. This beautiful phlox can only be pollinated by one type of insect. And it's not this bee down in the bottom right-hand corner. Because if you think about it, this tiny little hole in the middle of the flower, something has to be able to get their tongue down in there. And it's, again, not that bumblebee. If you want it pollinated, the only thing that can do that pollination is this day-flying sphinx moth. If you want to have the snowberry clearwing caterpillar, you have to have coral honeysuckle for it to eat. That's how specialized things are. So even animals we don't think of as having specialized relationships typically do. So how many people are from up north here and know what a chickadee is? Okay, great. So it's a small bird if you're not from up north, and it's known with its call, chickadee, chickadee, chickadee. And it's a very nice bird. People think that it's primarily a seed eater, and they do eat seeds in the winter, but when they have babies, they feed their chicks insects, and not just any insect, they specialize on caterpillars. And all day long, they're bringing caterpillars back to their nest. It's just constant. And really, although he's using this example of a chickadee from Delaware, this applies to almost all bird species. So hang with it. Don't think that you're exempt from understanding this because we're not from Delaware, okay? It applies right here to us as well. So why do they like caterpillars so much? Well, it could be because they're beautiful, and here's a lot of beautiful caterpillars. The one down on the bottom right is the local black swallowtail you might have seen. But it's more to it than just being beautiful. It's also because they're soft, large, nutritious, and full of the resources that those baby birds need. And here's a big, fat, juicy one going in. So, do we have any scientists in the room? Any science background people? I know Dawn is. Okay. So I'm not a scientist, I'm the first to admit, but I try to get through this part. So please give me a little grace here on the pronunciation. What's essential for the birds in the bugs and insects that they eat are the carotenoids. This is obviously a science chart about carotenoids. But there's all these types of carotenoids, and you can see they all come from plants. This is an example of how they come from vegetables, but they also come from lots of plants in our yard that we're growing. Why do birds need carotenoids? For all these reasons. To improve their sexual attractiveness, their coloring, their immune system, their sperm vitality, etc. So they're absolutely critical to get these carotenoids. But how does this happen? Because chickadees cannot make their own carotenoids. They have to get them from something that's eating the plants that's making the carotenoids. So, here's your chart on who eats the plants to get the carotenoids. And over on that far left, that big green thing, that's a caterpillar. And you can see that they have the most carotenoids of any type of insects here. Now, I personally wish it was the ants and the cockroaches over on the right, but that's not what nature laid out here. It's all on the caterpillars to provide the carotenoids. So, for most birds, caterpillars are not optional. There's not going to be any chickadees if there's not enough caterpillars. And how many does it take to make a nest of caterpillars? Well, get ready, because it's a lot. They're delivering food every 3 minutes, and they forage all day long. I'm surprised they even get to sleep at night, but it's 6 a.m. till 8 p.m. So how many species are they bringing? In 3 hours, his observation was they brought back 17 species, all collected within 50 meters of the nest. So they've got to be close by. So a chickadee, on average, to rear one clutch, meaning one little nest of chickadees, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. That is a lot of caterpillars for one nest. That's probably 3 baby birds, you know? That's just a whole lot of caterpillars. And here's the red-bellied woodpecker, which we have here right in our area. This red-bellied woodpecker weighs 8 times more than a chickadee. So what that means is it probably needs 8 times more the number of caterpillars to raise bigger babies that are in the nest. So, you know, let's just say it's 10,000 caterpillars per nest. That is a heck of a lot of caterpillars. And here's some other birds from our area that you'll recognize, the blue jay, the cardinal, etc. All those birds, I would say, are about the same size as the red-bellied woodpecker. They're not chickadee size. Chickadees are a very small bird. So these guys look bigger than that because they're just bigger than chickadees. And by the way, hummingbirds also have 80% of their diet is insects, whereas we probably all thought that was mostly nectar. So they need the insects too. So here's a list of all the birds that eat insects, and in fact 96% of our terrestrial bird species rear their young on insects, mostly caterpillars. So whether you recognize or can read all these birds on the list, it's 96% of all birds. That's a lot. That means there's very few birds that are not eating insects. And this is how critical it is, because this picture on the left is a nest of baby birds that the only food source they had was bird seed, and they couldn't survive on it, and they all died. So that's a very sad picture. And we're not against using bird seed, but you just want to use it judiciously, maybe more in the winter when it's baby bird season. You know, maybe put the bird seed aside a bit so that they're looking more for the real food that they need, the caterpillars and those kinds of things, the bugs and all. So, what types of landscapes are capable of producing 10,000 caterpillars for one nest of baby birds? Right? That's a lot. To answer that question, we're going back to where he started at the beginning with that specialized relationship between plants and insects. Now, plants don't want to be eaten. That's not why they're here. And they defend themselves pretty well with some distasteful chemicals. So how does this happen? How do the insects eat the plants? Well, they specialize on only a few types of plants, and that evolution has happened over millions of years. We're not going to be changing that in our little lifetimes, right? In fact, probably your relatives' lifetimes. It's not going to change. And we all know the story of the monarch butterfly, right? Everybody's heard that. And their problems that they're having. And the big reason they're having that problem is because they've developed a specialization on milkweed plants. And the milkweed plants are being eliminated due to development, and they're just not there. Now, milkweeds protect themselves with this cardiac glycoside stuff and that sticky white sap. Have you ever broken a stem on a milkweed and seen that sticky white sap? Well, what's really interesting, if that white sap gets on the mandibles or jaws of a monarch caterpillar, it glues them shut. So, you know, the caterpillar has to be pretty careful around this plant, right? So how is it constantly eating all the milkweed plants? Well, if you watch one sometime, it's really interesting. What they do is they start at the edge of the leaf and they eat their way in. And when they get to that part that's emitting any sticky white sap, they back off and they go backwards. And they go back and start at the edge again and come back in. So, I mean, that is just amazing to me, that nature. So this is what my milkweeds look like a lot of the time, but that's a good thing. So the upside of specialization is now the monarch can eat a plant protected by both cardiac glycosides and sticky latex sap. The downside is that's all they can eat, right? They can't eat anything else. And they really prefer the native milkweeds, not the commercial non-native milkweeds. So they're even pickier about, you know, it's got to be just the right kind, which is a good thing. So monarchs have declined 96%. We know there's a little bit of a crisis there. And really that's the same with almost all insects, that they have very specialized plants that they eat. So we can use that knowledge to build landscapes that support effective food webs. So here's another example. I have never seen these white-eyed vireos. I don't know, is anyone familiar with this bird? Have you seen those locally?
Yeah, in my yard.
Oh, really? Wow, so they are a native bird, huh? So they're probably in my yard and I just don't know it, right? Okay. Okay, well, great. So look at all the types of caterpillars that they feed their babies. And this is the plant that that caterpillar came from. So for instance, the blinded sphinx caterpillar comes from a black cherry. This caterpillar comes from that plant, etc. It's just kind of interesting to see all these different types that they brought back to the nest. So, you know, here's mom and dad busy all the time, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., bringing these caterpillars back. And then this last picture I like because here's everybody looking cozy, fat, and happy because they're getting all the juicy caterpillars that they needed to fill up this nest. So now what Dr. Tallamy is showing us is the type of trees that are going to produce these specialized caterpillars. This is a black walnut, and it produces the caterpillars below. Only native maples can produce these caterpillars. Only native elms can produce these ones. So if 90% of insects eat plants, only the ones which they've co-involved with, that's what we want to focus on. This is just a few oak tree caterpillars, and what you're going to see is that the oak tree is really the hero of our story here because they support the most variety of any plant in terms of number of insects and caterpillars. So it's not just birds that eat insects, all these guys do too. And although we might not like having some of these guys in our yard, they are critical to the food web. So if you eliminate any one in particular, it's going to mess up the whole food web. You know, we know that from when people have tried to eliminate bats and mosquitoes get out of control, etc. So We need all these guys, even if we don't like them all. 25% of the red fox's diet is insects, and 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. During a forest tent caterpillar outbreak in Michigan, individual black bears were eating 25,000 caterpillars a day. I wonder how they measured that, but I just think that's just amazing. How did you know that? I mean, that's a lot of caterpillars. So a world without insects is a world without biological diversity. Yet we're losing our insects, and he has tons of science to back this up if anybody wanted to check it out. What's happening to the species that rely on the insects that we're losing is that we're having a rapid decline of birds, and many birds facing extinction because they don't have the food source that they need. So he's trying to get ready for every possible argument people could have about this. Why can't biodiversity be sustained in our parks and preserves? Because when you take a very large area of land like this and you shrink it down to a small piece of land, like on the bottom, which is what we call a park, right? Then that small piece of land is very subject to environmental changes that the larger piece could withstand. And graphically, that's what this shows, is the top line is the large piece, has variation in the environment and can handle it. The smaller piece of land on the bottom is not gonna do as well. And a great example of this that we can relate to is hurricanes. So if you have a really large piece of property and a hurricane comes through, blows a few trees down, everything's okay. If you had a small piece of property and some of those trees blow down, that's it, you're done. You know, there's no more. There's only so many trees on that piece of land and they're gonna all blow down. So that's what he's talking about when he says environmental changes that will affect a smaller chunk of land. So that's not really the answer. Our natural areas are not large enough to sustain nature, and on top of that, we have to fight off invasive species, 3,300 types that have been introduced. As you can tell, you might have seen this guy, I think it's the kudzu, but this thing just takes over. And people say, hey, it's green, what's the problem? You know, why can't animals learn to eat that? Well, as we just learned, the animals have a very specific relationship with very specific plants, and these invasive plants are not part of their co-evolution over time. And in fact, they're messing it up because they actually suffocate the native plants. They suffocate a lot of wildlife, so it's doing far more detriment than whatever little shred of beauty somebody might think that it's doing. I thought it was very interesting. I read an article about they're actually attributing a lot of the wildfire problem out in Hawaii to invasive plants, because when a lot of the sugarcane fields were closed down, invasives moved in and they were very flammable, and it just was fuel for fire. So that's like a pretty dramatic example. So next example here he's going to use, we're going to measure what happens when we replace native plant communities with plants outside local food webs. He calls this the 12 by 12 experiment. You get to decide what you're going to put in this little space and create a living landscape. So you could put a white oak in, and I already told you that the white oak, any oak species is the hero of the day. So this is a good guy. And he did this experiment with a lot of, we probably think, graduate students helping him out. Just at head height, he could count 410 caterpillars, 19 species. So that's at the 6-foot height, which, you know, it's not even the whole tree. And look, the tree does not look defoliated. It's looking just fine. You could plant a black cherry in your 12 by 12. That had 239 caterpillars, or 14 species. Or you could plant a calorie pear. Anyone familiar with this from up north? This is like the bad guy of our story, the evil, completely opposite of hero person. Because they had one caterpillar, one species. Or you could plant a burning bush that had 4 caterpillars, one species. So if you wanted to plant these 4 plants, here's what you would be supporting. And it is helping you think more about what you're planting and how that could support wildlife. So back to the evil one of the program here, the calorie pear. This is what it looks like in full bloom, which is why people probably fell in love with it. It doesn't even really make pears. It's not, I don't know why they named it the calorie
It
pear.
also doesn't smell good. Like,
Yeah.
It smells awful.
Yeah, but it looks so pretty. So, and what this does is all this prettiness blew across the highway and populated this whole field. And it's now on the invasive plant list. So you can't just be, putting stuff out there for beauty, because it's like destroyed the field across the street now and whatever life was in there. So, Dr. Tallamy is saying land ownership is more than a privilege, it's a responsibility. Which plants should we be sure to have in our landscapes? The ones that provide the most insect variety. And so what he's done is, and I'll show you this website in a second, by zip code, figured out the plants that support the most species. And so up here in the top right, the hero, Corcus, any oak tree, supports the most species. Down here at the bottom right, sorry, top left, bottom right, all these zeros support nothing. Absolutely nothing. So what he's saying is we could be making choices in our yard based on this information. And it's out there, available to everybody on these websites. So, and I'll show this slide again at the end, so you could actually look up your zip code and get that list I just showed you for your zip code, so you'll know exactly which plants you could be using to support the most wildlife, which is awesome. Okay, we'll show it again at the end. The other thing we wanted to, he wanted to bring up is foraging hubs, so plants that serve as key sources of food and working together. So if you're roughly my age, you've probably seen this map in the back of an airplane seat that shows a hub situation, right? And what he's saying is that's basically how birds look for food. So if you think about your hub situation, they're going for the plants that provide the most food. The hero hub down here is Atlanta, because it had the big oak tree. And then all these other ones that had the natives that he just talked about, they're going where the food is. They know which ones to go for in that upper left corner. They're ignoring everything over here in the zeros. They're not stupid. So it's very interesting to think about that way. And he's got another example coming up that shows that as well. But basically, 5% of the native plant species will support 73% of available caterpillars. Or conversely, you could plant 95% of your landscape with native plants, but if they're not supporting the most species, they're supporting fewer of the insects. So it's just kind of a different way to look at it. Oaks support 557 species. Ginkgo, not the hero, 5 species. Native prunus, 456. This one I can't even pronounce, supports no caterpillars. And this one's very few. Again, another gorgeous native plant is 103. So what he's asking us to think about is, this is your landscape, and you want to think about the plants you put in your landscape as if they were bird feeders, because basically they are. They're making caterpillar food. So you can have a lot of bird feeders in your yard, or just a few. If it's an oak tree, that's still pretty cool. You can have full bird feeders, or you can have empty bird feeders. But we're not fooling the birds when we fail to plant what they need, because they can't survive if they don't have it. And this is another example of a hub situation he created. This, I don't know where this neighborhood is, but the red lines basically show where the birds were going for their food, and they were going to all the native trees. And they're ignoring, you could see lots of other trees in this neighborhood. They're ignoring all that other green space for just these native trees. So compared to native landscapes, yards dominated by non-native plants have fewer caterpillars, less likely to have breeding chickadees or birds, contain fewer eggs in the nest, eggs less likely to survive, produced fewer fledglings, and delayed maturation, because they need that food. It's absolutely critical. And what he's showing here is that at about the 25% mark on this graph right here is where the use of non-native plants actually creates unsustainability for wildlife replacement. So they can't replace what is already there of their population. So in his yard that he did all this caterpillar counting, 51 species migrated through his yard. And he's saying you don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but please save it where you live. They've got an evolutionary history together, most organisms, and they have not had time to develop the specialized relationships, and it's not going to change, in other words. This took millions of years to create, and it's not going to change even if we wanted it to. If those specialized relations disappeared, so would a lot of the wildlife that relies on it. How many species do we need? All of them. So basically biodiversity equals ecosystem services. We've degraded the planet quite a bit. I think we're all familiar with that. But what I like here is he has a great quote. Here's the key. This is how big the earth was when humans appeared 2 million years ago. And this is how big it is today, the same size. How can we take more and more each day from the earth if the earth itself isn't growing? The life that used to be in this landscape is now gone with the wind. And yet 86% of the U.S. east of the Mississippi is privately owned, and that's our opportunity to raise the bar for what we ask our landscapes to do, to support life, sequester carbon, clean and manage the water, enrich the soil, and support pollinators. So losing our pollinators is not an option. We're not talking about good land stewardship, we're talking about essential land stewardship. If your property does not generate all the ecosystem services you need, you have to borrow that from somewhere else. And you can't borrow it from here because they also have no food webs, very little carbon sequestration, etc. So, you know, it's not gonna happen. Now this is interesting because it's showing the past criteria for choosing plants for our landscapes. And we all grew up this way. I mean, it's not our fault, we just grew up this way. But we pretty much chose our landscapes based on decorative value, screens. You know, there wasn't a lot of thought put into supporting wildlife generally. What he's saying is let's balance that a little bit in the future with what is the value our landscapes are adding to the food web and wildlife appreciation, pollinators, etc. Let's create a balance. What does a biodiverse friendly neighborhood look like? Well, to share our neighborhoods with wildlife, we need to create corridors. We'll talk about that in a minute. Reduce the area now and lawn and begin transition. I love how he calls non-natives alien ornamentals to native ornamentals. And again, if this is your yard, you got a couple trees there, you got a lot of mowed grass, What he's saying, if you even just planted some native trees or bushes on the perimeter, you'd still have some grass for the kids to play in, the dogs to play in, but you've started to create some space for wildlife. And if a whole bunch of people did that, your neighbors, and talked them into it, you've created corridors here down the middle of all those borders of your properties. So now the birds and the wildlife really have some place that they can thrive. And if you replanted half of the area now in your lawn, east of the Mississippi, that would create 20 million acres of wildlife, which is greater than the sum of all these national parks. That's just amazing. Half of our mowed lawn, if everybody did that. Some people will do more, some people will probably do less, but let's do something. And we have some examples here. Has anybody been out to Texas? I mean, there's awesome, just wildflowers galore out there. This is a great example of how they changed their medians and their road to wildflowers. This is not a good example, but you could make it like this, which would be wonderful for wildlife. This is the side yard a lady had where she realized she wasn't using her side yard anymore, so she replaced that lawn with a diverse native plant community. Very pretty. This again looks like something from Texas where they replanted a lot of the roadside with native flowers. And this is a corporate landscape, and he says, what a wasted opportunity. Is this supposed to be something the employees go out and enjoy at lunchtime? Or would this be? That would be awesome. And again, just some contrasting pictures of streetscapes that we could shoot for. So again, thinking more about balancing what we choose to put in our landscape. So, does your landscape have to be 100% natives? No. But this picture was very meaningful to me because it's basically saying the non-native plants in your landscape are statues. They're just there for your enjoyment of their beauty. So you would really like looking at that croton because nature is getting nothing out of that croton that I have in my front yard. And so when I started looking around my yard, thinking about all the statues I have, it just made me think a lot differently because they're not adding any value to the wildlife. The birds don't appreciate them, nothing. The caterpillars, nothing is appreciating that statue that I have. So it's just a very unique way of looking at your yard. He says, how many statues do you want in your yard? So how do you know when you've succeeded a bit with native plants? Well, you'll see some leaves that have been nibbled on up here in the top left corner. You'll see some weird looking bugs you might not have seen before. And most cool, you'll hear some baby birds squawking because you'll know that the food is there that they need. Mom and dad generally aren't going to create a nest of baby birds in a space that doesn't have the food to support the baby birds. So if you hear that squawking going on, and we know it's 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. that mom and dad are working, you'll know that you've got the food source that you need for them. So, last example here, we can only save nature if we learn to live with it. And this last example is about the Atala butterfly. Is anybody familiar with the Atala butterfly? Oh, good, a few people. Well, here's something we accidentally saved from extinction without even trying, so that means we can do it. This is the Atala caterpillar and chrysalis, and the only plant it eats is the coontie. This is a great landscape plant, green continuously, never gets more than about 3 feet high, just gorgeous. But the problem with this plant, not really a problem, but it turns out that coontie roots were used by Native Americans as a source of starch. That wasn't the problem. The problem was they taught the settlers, and the settlers wiped out the coontie plants. So attempts to list the Atala as an endangered species failed because nobody could find them. But landscapers saved the day because residential landscapes found how wonderful this plant is, and they started bringing this plant back. And I mean, I agree, in the past 5 or 10 years, I have seen an abundance of coatis being used in landscapes, and that's just awesome, because then the atalas came back, once the plants came back. So we could do that one without even really trying too hard. So fortunately, nature is malleable, resilient, and forgiving. But we need to figure out how, I mean, she's gonna give us one more chance, but we need to figure out how to take advantage of that. Based on Dr. Tallamy's research, we know all plants are not created equal. We've got a few of his books back in the back there where we have our books for sale. It's a little bit hard to get his books, so if we've got some back there, I encourage you to get it, because we have to get ours used off of Amazon. And Martha also has some other great books back there. And again, here's the websites where you can find the plants for your area by zip code. They're also typically sorted by trees, bushes, and flowers, so you don't have to figure that all out. We all know oaks are trees, but you know, after that, things can get a little fuzzy sometimes. So this is just a great resource. It's also on the FNPS website. Highly encourage you to find that. This is our list of local native plant nurseries. Highly encourage you to shop here. These are small businesses. We had a great question on Sunday where people were asking, well, why can't we buy native plants at the big box stores? There's a pretty good chance the native plants at the big box stores were not grown here locally. They may be native to Florida, but that might be Ocala, Florida. Your chance of success goes up much greater if they were grown right here in Brevard County. And these guys are awesome. Their prices are usually better than the big box stores, super competitive. So I'd highly encourage you to use them. And we don't even know how blessed we are. I was talking to a lady from Jacksonville, and she said they have 0 native plant nurseries in Jacksonville. So they're ordering everything by mail order. And I was astounded because we have this awesome list. And it pretty much all started with Maple Street Natives and Sharon and Brent Dolan. And a lot of these folks used to work for them and went off, started their own thing. But we are truly, truly blessed. So highly encourage you to use these resources. They'll do a landscape plan for you. They'll come out to your house, give you advice for a fee. I mean, they want you to be successful. So please use them. And now we're back to our commercials. I'm going to, who am I turn it over to you real quick? This is Carl Weinberger. He's the president of our chapter. He's gonna do, you wanna tell me when to turn your slides, or?
I just wanted to just say thank you all for coming out. And I want to, you know, as you can see, we're going to be in November. We're going to have our first meeting at the new meeting place, which is the First Church of the Nazarene on Babcock Street. If you know where FIT is, the main entrance, it's on the other side of the road, on the east side, and the parking is around back. And you know, you can. Everything else is going to be normal about our monthly meetings. I'd like to have all the board members just kind of wave and say hi or whatever. They've been working hard on this and the yard tour. So I thank them for a lot of this stuff. And I hope you all can come out for the yard tour. It's going to be October 14th from 9 to 4. I hope to see you there. Linda?
Linda is our co-chair for the landscape tour, so she's going to take over the commercials.
Well, I want to tell you about a little bit about the Florida Native Plant Society and our mission. So I broke that down so that I'd remember it, and hopefully you will too, because there's only 3 letters you have to remember. Florida Native Plant Society is CPR. That's our mission, okay? Conservation, preservation, and restoration. That's all you have to remember, 3 letters. And that's what we are, that's what we aim for. That's our mission in life. And we really enjoy that. We love teaching the community all about natives, and we'd love for you to join us. And what happened to the rest of the slide?
Well, this is the next one, Carl did
Okay.
the last one.
Okay. So, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to do commercials tonight. So, my first commercial is Native Butterfly Flowers. Awesome, awesome group. They're right off 192, so they're very close to Palm Bay, but they're right smack dab, I think, in the middle of downtown Melbourne, I call it. Change of Greenery, they're more in the O'Galley area, and they're relatively new to the nursery game, but boy, I'm telling you, they pack, they're heavy hitters. They're like the large machinery people. And of course, our own City of Satellite Beach is my favorite because I live here. And they were kind enough, as Jane said, to loan us the use of this building for the last 2 presentations. And they're awesome. And we're gonna be here again in October. Again in October the 10th and the 10th and 11th? No. Where is it? 8th and 9th, sorry. Okay, so I help with the brochures and I help with the entire, setup of this, but I forget the dates. We've gone over them so many times. So I want to remind you that the tickets are going to go up. And we've done this because a lot of people, we need to push the brochures on you because they have to be printed. And if you want them printed in that small book to carry around with you at the garden tour, that's very convenient. So we're going to raise the rate of the ticket, goes to $15, which includes the printed brochure. Or you can just get the ticket itself, $10 before October 9th, okay? So that'll be before the next presentation in October. And let's see what else. So the different levels, go back to the other one.
Oh, yeah, we don't.
Okay. So that's, and is there another slide? I thought there was one more
there
slide.
is. But
Okay.
also wanted to bring up real quick, that first meeting Carl was talking about in November. We have an awesome speaker, Attorney Barbara Stage, who's speaking on the legal aspects of Florida-friendly landscaping. So if you're dealing with an HOA situation, this is a must-come-to session because we've had people tell us, I can't do what I want to do because of my HOA. This is the lady to listen to about it, okay? Because she'll help you figure that out. Okay. And
Any questions? We have answers.
Well, we have a great team
Well, Jane
here.
has answers.
Great team here. We
Yes.
had an awesome question Sunday. Jamie, do you want to recap that or you want me to?
Becca can do it.
What?
Becca wasn't in the room.
I'll tell her what it was about. Why don't we want to save all the caterpillars?
Yeah, for some people who had a pollinator garden, a lady had a pollinator garden and she was very upset at the caterpillars constantly disappearing because of her, because the birds were getting them. And what to do about that. Y'all's answer was excellent.
Caterpillars are meant to be baby bird food, and a few turn into butterflies, which we can also appreciate. But the full intent of them in the ecosystem and in the food web is really to be food for other critters, and so it's a blessing that the food is there for those other animals.
Right.
Did everybody hear her? Yes?
I'll yell louder.
That's a mom.
Come on, I need that mom voice.
So really, it's awesome to have a pollinator garden because you're raising a higher proportion of pollinators that way. But you have to know there's a little bit of a sacrifice. And when I was whining to my son up in Philadelphia about why am all my monarch caterpillars disappearing, and he said to me, well, Mom, it's a buffet out there. What do you expect? And I'm like, yeah, you're right about that. So that's a pretty good answer. But any other questions? Yes, sir.
had a whole brood of bats that they seem to just have left. Is that normal?
We had a bat box, and they were there for a few months, and then they left. So did bats sort of go from place to place? Anybody know?
They're a bit nomadic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Does it need to be cleaned?
It's
Because
probably
it's
not.
on it's on a pivot pole.
You do not
Yeah,
clean bat houses.
everything.
The rate will take care of that for you. If you clean them, you will actually discourage something coming back into them. And yes, bats can be in this area. Some bats are migratory, so you will only see them certain times of the year. And bats move like everything else. They go through a habitat change and they will move around. It may take them years to get back to your house. So, fair warning, don't expect them to show up at the same time every year.
Don't give up hope.
No work is better.
Good
Now,
question.
is your bat house have a flight path?
No, I didn't.
I don't know, but we had a bat lady put it in.
Oh, you-
okay, you had a bat lady,
She painted
okay.
it and everything.
Okay, I know exactly what you did, you're good.
Yeah, and there were memorabilia, so a bunch of other neighbors have them, and they're like, oh, well, we don't have bats anymore, you must have our bats, so, you know.
They move around, they'll be back.
Don't bats eat mosquitoes?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I like bats. I don't have a problem with them. They used to be in my yard all the time in South Miami. When I was living down in South Miami, I had bats all the time. They, you know, skim over your head at night if you're sitting outside. And everybody'd scream, you know, it's like, ah! But they took care of the mosquitoes down there, let me tell you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So is there also foliage to eliminate, to get rid of invasive reptile and other species? In other words, the geckos, some of the Cuban frogs, or things like that. So does anybody do any work? I mean, they do things on attracting the native things, or they do any work on using landscape or whatever, removal or adding stuff to get rid of those exotic creatures that are invading?
Texas pistol.
Yeah. They frown on that in our village.
A baby gun?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really don't know the answer to that. We're just so focused on, let's get some more natives in, you know, to attract the right kind of wildlife, that would be kind of the other side of that equation.
Have you seen the salt guns? You know what a salt gun is?
Really?
It literally shoots table salt. Yeah, the geckos don't like that.
Oh,
I've chased them off of my.
Well, that's the type of, type of thing that putting the landscape, geckos don't like it, because we had, when they first came around, it was just a deluge of geckos. Now they're less, something's learned to eat them, but they're still geckos.
Yeah. I think they're good bird food, but.
I think the snakes count too, I'm not certain.
Yeah.
Cuban tree frogs will also eat geckos. I witnessed.
I've seen that.
Any other questions?
Guests too, was really interesting.
Discussion. Okay, so in the other room, we've got some books. We've also got, I forgot to mention, the book up in the top left corner, Florida Native, How to Plant a Florida Native Yard. That's the book we're basing the October talk on, loosely. So that book we have lots of because we figured people would want those. But you know, help yourself. Check out the books and the tour tickets. We're not pushing them. We're just trying to provide the resources to help people get going faster. If you come on the tour, obviously you get to see some wonderful, mature landscapes. So you can envision what your 4-inch pot is going to turn into someday. And that's just valuable. That's how I got started. So it was just awesome being able to see what it was going to look like in 10 years. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for coming.
I did not recognize. Okay. Glad you made this.